Good day to all once again. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us again for the keynote address of the 8th South Asian Media and Cultural Studies Conference. First of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mariam Sheikh and Ms. Saima Salim for giving us your precious time and for this keynote address today. We also have Dr. John Mayo with us, who will be moderating this keynote address. I'd like to briefly introduce Dr. Mayo, and then Dr. Mayo, you may please take it over. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. John K. Mayo is director of the William A. Kerr International Education and Dialogue Initiative with Florida State University's College of Social Sciences and Public Policy. He also is a professor and dean emeritus of Florida State University's College of Communication. Prior to being named dean in 1994, Dr. Mayo served for 10 years as director of FSU's Center for International Studies, part of the Learning Systems Institute. He's the author of 2 books, as well as numerous research monographs and journal articles on development and intercultural communication. His research and teaching interests include development communication, telecommunications policy, diffusion of innovations, and distance learning. Dr. Mayo directed USAID-sponsored research and development project in El Salvador, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Peru, and Nepal. He's also served as a consultant to several international agencies on the editorial board and also on the editorial board of Journal of Communication, Communication Theory, and Communication for Development and Social Change. In 2000, he produced Witness, a television documentary in collaboration with the US Lawyers Committee on Human Rights. Dr. Mayo received his AB in politics from Princeton and his MA and PhD in communication from Stanford. He served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia from 1965 to 1967 and as a Fulbright lecturer in Chile in 1972. It's an honor to have you with us. And Dr. Mayo, for our live audience, is also the co-founder of the South Asian Media and Cultural Studies Conference. Thank you so much for your time, and please take it over from here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vaibhav, for your kind introduction. Welcome to all. And thank you especially for all you have done to organize FSU's 8th annual South Asian and Cultural Studies Conference. We're so pleased to have participants from around the world and especially from South Asia. Thanks also to our conference partner, the Christ University in Bangalore, India, for its support. And finally, at FSU, to the Center for Global Engagement's Engage Your World lecture series, and the Ruth K. and Shepard Broad Foundation of Miami, which has co-sponsored the lectureship from the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy here at FSU. The conference's planning team chose Imagining Futures for the title this year because media and cultural studies are such vibrant and growing professional as well as academic fields throughout South Asia, and because their horizons are so promising. Sadly, however, there are also some dark clouds on those horizons. As promising and new emerging digital technologies have proven to be, so exciting in continuing on, recently they've also become pathways for the spread of fake and misleading information, as well as government-sanctioned lies on a massive scale. In fact, the scale and spread of disinformation, especially via social media, constitute for what our conference's keynote speakers have termed an infodemic. Dr. Mariam Sheikh and Ms. Sama Salim are counselors at Pakistan's permanent mission to the United Nations in New York. Ms. Salim is a career civil servant who earned her LLM in human rights and humanitarian law from the University of Geneva. Previously, she was a Fulbright Fellow in International Affairs at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Affairs at Georgetown University in Washington. Dr. Mariam Sheikh, I'm proud to say, earned her PhD in communication, along with certificates in emergency management and program evaluation at Florida State University. She is an active scholar who has presented many research papers on multiple platforms. She also is a career civil servant with the government of Pakistan and currently serves as counselor for press and public diplomacy at her country's UN mission. Together, Ms. Salim and Dr. Sheikh have studied existing gaps and challenges to countering disinformation around the world. Their analyses and the recommendations that flowed from them were the foundation of Pakistan's landmark resolution to the UN General Assembly, titled Countering Disinformation for the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. The resolution was adopted by the UN General Assembly last November. We are honored that Ms. Salim and Dr. Sheikh are joining us remotely from New York City today. They will share their insights regarding the course of the infodemic and how individual nations, as well as international organizations, can counter it. The title of their keynote presentation is Disinformation, Shaping the Future Landscape. Welcome to FSU.
Hello.
We can hear you, Dr. Sheikh.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. And I welcome you all, our virtual audience at the South Asian Media and Communication Conference. And I thank Dr. Emil and Dr. Stephen McDowell, of course, my Florida State College, University College of Communication and Information for inviting us to speak on this August forum. I will have to share my screen quickly so that we have made a presentation for you to share. I hope you all can see.
Yes, thank you.
So let's begin. The topic on which we are presenting is quite a significant phenomenon, especially in this digital age, disinformation shaping the future landscape. Okay, so let's begin. As you can see here, this is an outline of our presentation. First, I will present a short thesis on the conceptual elements of the term disinformation. Then we will have a look at the global landscape of disinformation, where I have taken some classic cases in which disinformation is more common. And moving forward, I will talk about levels and range of responses, existing practices in countering disinformation with a focus on South Asia. Afterwards, Ms. Saima will lead the discussion to explaining key gaps and challenges containing disinformation, which led us to realize the need of bringing up an initiative of a Pakistan-sponsored resolution on countering disinformation in the United States nations, which was recently adopted by consensus in the General Assembly. So, I will start with the basics because defining disinformation at this point in the present context is very important. Disinformation is by definition is an information disorder. It is a manipulated information that is knowingly shared to cause individual or social harm. 4 components here I would like my audience to take note of, which make any information as called as a disinformation. It should be false, deliberate, misleading, and it has an intention to cause harm. Please keep these 4 components in mind. We will come back to it because it is important to understand the gravity, sensitivity, and the significance of this phenomena of disinformation in present context. So let's go next. You see here many terms on this slide. It is important for us to discern and delineate the difference between similar terms we often hear about regarding false information. No wonder Misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, yellow journalism, propaganda, satire includes false information, but they have different connotations and different scopes. The term misinformation, for example, is often mixed up with the disinformation. But misinformation is derived from mis for mistaken information, which is not intentional, while the disinformation is purely intentional and a planned activity. Whereas if you can see malinformation has a limited scope of private individual, while disinformation is any information which is intended for causing harm, but in a public interest. The information is always of the public interest. Moving forward, let's see this word, fake news. As you all know, we all hear about the term fake news a lot of times, even in journalism and all. This is often term which is known as an alternate term for disinformation. But we must know that news is information about current events. So fake news is a false information about current events, but it also includes misinformation or disinformation of any happening. So we might say that false information or fake news is disinformation, but it is not exclusively a disinformation. And it cannot be used as an alternate for disinformation. Likewise, in usage of the term fake news, we also see that there is an absence of definitional rigor, which has resulted in a failure to recognize the diversity of misinformation and disinformation, whether of form, motivation, and dissemination. Once we say that false information, disinformation is planned activity, there must be some motives involved. There are multiple motives and multiple dimensions of disinformation. Political, ideological, commercial purposes are involved in order when a government or any entity or an individual plans to disseminate false information. Two most common examples are in political arena, to disrupt and distort elections, referenda, swing political debate in favor or against specific candidates is a common phenomena where disinformation is used. Then we have to see what are the targets and sources of disinformation. Usually in the organized systematic campaigns we have seen in the digital sphere, we have seen, and even in the past as well, the governments used to target their dissenters or critics. Critics targets governments, countries targeted by foreign disinformation operations in which a perpetrator targets people in another country. And then there are companies, groups of people target for commercial, fraudulent purposes, ideological purposes, having political agendas. So these are some of the purposes and motives which make these targets and sources viable. Now, this digital age has made the spread of dissemination of disinformation very, very easy and convenient. Social media platforms, as you see, they are quite exploited, especially Facebook and Twitter are the main platforms where fake accounts, fake followers, fake likes, fake social media posts, memes are quite vibrant. Then there is an online manipulation, online harassment ongoing using the disinformation tools. Then these, on the top of it, these all activities are supported by troll armies, public relations companies, advertisements on online platforms, which are making the disinformation more systematic and more spread with a larger scope. Then in the digital age, the tools and the tactics of disinformation are getting more sophisticated and innovative. You have heard about artificial intelligence and big data analytics. These are being used in the disinformation for the disinformation purposes to target, tailor, and refine messaging strategies, paid advertisements, and using search engine optimization. Several strategies, tactics are used. If you have not heard about cyber troops, you should hear about this. These cyber troops used to manipulate online public opinion by either maliciously taking down legitimate content or accounts or to amplify false information. You can see how systematic this digital sphere is organizingly disseminating disinformation. And there are a wide range of actors are involved. Private firms are involved, volunteers are involved, social media influencers are involved. And on the top of it, there are several other tactics as well. Fake accounts, fake websites, switching archive sites, bots, AI-generated pictures or text, political actors and PR marketing are putting AI profile pictures, and they are naming and shaming and whatnot. So if you have heard about cyber troops and digital disinformation, connected with disinformation are automated accounts, human curated accounts, hacked, stolen accounts, which are very, very prevalent in the domain of disinformation. Then we must understand that means to spread disinformation is not random. It is always through organized media campaigns, formally organized social media campaigns. The research had revealed so far that on the political parties or government agencies in 2018, 48 countries were involved in online manipulation. Then political parties and governments have spent more than $500 million on the research, development, implementation of psychological operations and public opinion manipulations since 2010, as one research says. In Philippines, Rappler was a news network which documented hundreds of websites and millions of social media accounts and groups that systematically and consistently is spreading information. In 2015, we also heard about EU Disinfo Lab, and there are several other investigative networks which are constantly revealing shocking information of how organized these media campaigns are. So there's a point of concern. Now you have to look at the global landscape in this regard. First and foremost, which is very current point of concern, is COVID-19 pandemic. Before I move on to the motives and attributes of COVID-19 concerning disinformation, we must understand that in the case of COVID-19 pandemic, often the campaigns and the sources confuse COVID-19 pandemic false information with disinformation or misinformation. I would point it here that in the case of COVID-19 pandemic, both misinformation and disinformation is going on. Unintentional and intentional strategies are being done. In the case of disinformation of COVID-19 pandemic, all three motives are involved at this point of time, which is very interesting case for all the researchers. For the political purposes, the example is the COVID-19 on origin and spread of the pandemic. Then for ideological purposes, the vaccine efficiency issue was quite taken up. Then for the commercial and disinformation, people were extracting consumers' money through giving fake cures. And what were the attributes of this COVID-19 disinformation? There was unverified claims about the origin of the virus, then denying the spread of disease, providing the false information on infection rates, fatality figures, healthcare advices, fake cures, and all this. What were the negative impacts of that? It was detrimental to efforts to control the pandemic. This was quite a harm to social recovery, then endangering the rights to health and life, compromising people's trust in public information and state institution. And this was a classic case of disinformation. Now shift your gears to political arena. We have seen lots of things are happening in the politics already before the time of digital sphere, but now in 2020 US elections, there was a lot of confusion due to disinformation. Then domestic politics, there were misleading material online was there. Russian online interference campaigns allegedly meddled in 2016 election, which is also on the news. Then the New York Times recently uncovered a network of 1,300 online local news sites that are spreading propaganda paid for by conservative political operatives. There is domestic disinformation campaigns. We have heard about Congress versus BJP in India, or Biden versus Trump. So these are two examples, but there are many. Then there is a state-sponsored disinformation, which is the case of communal content in India is quite a case. And I have put down some of the list of the fake news, often called for false disinformation in the political. This is just a small list, and there are many. But point of concern is not just limited to political or COVID-19 arena. Racial discrimination, disinformation is being widely used. January 6th, the attack on the Capitol, we all have remembered, is by many whipped into a frenzy by online disinformation campaign. Then there is a case of digital blackface. If you have not heard, please search. This is a point of concern that the elections were manipulated racially, the campaigns were manipulated. Then we have heard about Russian trolls. So these are all racial dimensions of disinformation. On the slide, you can see several instances I have put together to see how disinformation is being disseminated. Then there is also the religious dimension. Christian, if you see religious dimension, then we have to hear about the impact of disinformation. All of this, what it is doing with the consumer or the user of information. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, no doubt it is creating. But there is a high volume of online vilification, chilling effect, harming of consumer of information. The consumer's rights are being, privacy rights are being sabotaged. Fraud and cybercrime is rampant. And then there is a social discord, competing nationalism, infodemic. We have often heard about that. Hostility and violence is coming up as a result of disinformation. There are examples, so many. There is a stigmatization and a stereotyping. Racism and racial discrimination, as you can see, it's going on. Xenophobia and related intolerances are being propagated. So these are all the points of concern. One thing, religious discrimination is another point of concern. You have seen the example of Ilhan Omar, who was falsely accused of election fraud because of her religious identity. Then we have heard about Islamophobic disinformation and hate speech. Often in the context of Corona, you have heard about Corona jihad, bioterrorism, biological jihad. These are examples of disinformation. Then if you have heard about Christian Kanuners, they Save the Children campaign. This was also the work of disinformation. So these are point of concerns. So now here the question arises, what are the existing practices and responses on the part of those who are being targeted or who are being involved, have a stake in all this disinformation? Existing level of responses are three-tiered: organizational, national, governmental level, and then international level. When we talk about organization, we talk about social media companies, platforms, which are the source of disseminating. Civil society, the NGOs, the other agencies, non-governmental agencies who are involved. So we have to see one by one what they are doing. On the platform side, we have seen that the response to disinformation is in three categories. It is interactive, it is behavioral, it is restrictive. What they do is they promote online literacy, user information. They want user to be informed, to delineate fact from fiction. Then behavioral, they want to label and warning or register the fake news. Then they are restrictive sometimes. They limit the visibility of a malified content. They took the content down and all. And this is all done on the four models of content regulation. The imposition of a duty of care, which is you have to self-regulate, command and criminality, you have to punish, enhanced oversight, you have to take down the website, and accountability by design. So let's see media platforms, what media platforms are doing right now. Often they resort to oversights and shutdowns. We have seen Facebook's, they have developed a new oversight board as a result of countering disinformation. Facebook has developed community standards. Twitter has made rules. YouTube has developed community guidelines. But we have seen that between 2000 and 2020, Facebook and Twitter announced that they had taken down 147 influence operations in total. In 2019 and again in 2020, Facebook removed covert social media influence operations that targeted Libya and were linked to Russian businessmen. There are several examples. This shows that the scope of disinformation is still enlarging and it's widening. This slide is very important. This will show you the origins and the targets countries, which is so complex phenomena. Those countries which are targeting are also the source of disinformation, and those are vibrant not only Facebook but also on this is a global landscape, that the scope of the dissemination, the spread of disinformation is that grave. Now, Twitter's proactive enforcement action on accounts which were engaged, they called it spam, and they blocked the accounts. YouTube also developed hate and harassment policy. Google also has recently developed a ranking policy. These are all some of the measures they have taken. Besides, there are also tools which are being developed. This is just a list. It is a never-ending list available if you search on websites of, these are often called fact-checking tools. These are developed like you have seen on the screen. These are all fact-checking tools developed technologically, how to combat and counter disinformation. Then civil society has also come forward. We have seen Defense League, EU Disinformation Lab, Community Mapping Dashboards, IRI, Beacon Project, Digital Forensic Research Lab, Global Disinformation Index, DFR Lab. All are the efforts maybe happening in silos or in groups to counter disinformation. So much is happening already. We have to see where the problem is. States, yes, states are also working. At least 28 countries had passed legislation related to disinformation. Either they have been updating existing regulations or passing new legislation. Governments also directed 188 internet shutdowns in 2018. And in the United States, the First Amendment of the Constitution has so far prevented the adoption of any laws curtailing freedom of speech. The most important, which I want to put my audience to attention, is the Germany's Network Enforcement Act, which is also called Facebook Act. This is also an effort to combat. If we look at the Europe and other countries, in France, law on freedom of press criminalizing the malafide publication. So there are some laws happening. Malta's criminal code also criminalizes the malicious spreading. Then when we talk about Network Facebook Act, this is very comprehensive. It requires digital platforms with more than 2 million members to have an effective and transparent procedures. So this is a comprehensive thing. If you see the context of South Asian countries, in Bangladesh, they adopted a Digital Security Act. Government of India, they have used the internet shutdown as a way to deal with the fake news. India also, in their e-commerce policy, notes that online platforms have a responsibility and a liability. So the duty of care dimension can be seen here. In Pakistan, Prevention of Electronic Crime Act partially addressed fake news. They also developed fake news busters developed by Ministry of Information. So partly the states are cognizant of the issue. If you see at the regional level, we have seen Council of Europe, European Union, European Digital Media Observatory, European Commission. They are very, very active. You can see on the slide. I would just quickly play this to show you how European Union is working.
We're working with online platforms and we encourage them to step up their action against disinformation on the coronavirus. The platforms are facilitating access to trustworthy sources, such as public health authorities, and they demote and even take down harmful content and exploitative or misleading ads.
So you can see on regional level, lots of things are happening. On the international level, what we see is in 1937, League of Nations, they used the law of concerning broadcasting in the cause of peace, and their Article 3 provides that if there is any information available or anything incorrectness, we have to see that. And then there was a 2017 joint declaration on freedom of expression and fake news, disinformation and propaganda. But beyond that, we haven't seen any legislative or a legal measure or a collective measure which can address the disinformation. But we must acknowledge that UNESCO has worked a lot in working on the disinformation. If you can see on the screen, they have a digital publication by UNESCO. They have provided tools. They have provided capacity building training. They are conducting side events with Department of Global Communication of the United Nations. And they also have developed a policy brief on COVID-19. So they have done a groundwork on that, no wonder. Then Department of Global Communication at the United Nations, they initiated a verified campaign in the context of COVID-19, and they also held some seminars in the context of political disinformation. But that information was limited partially to COVID-19 and mixed the misinformation and the disinformation challenges together.
The world, people are scared. They want to know what to do and where to turn for advice. This is a time for science and solidarity.
Share, verified.
So this is the quick view of what they are doing. And then if you see special rapporteur on freedom of expression and information, they also released a report and they acknowledged that disinformation is curtailing human rights. And this was a quite responsible act on part of that to acknowledge the problem. So from here, I would ask Ms. Saima to take a lead and follow up on our initiatives on disinformation resolution. Over to you, Ms. Saima.
Thank you, Mariam. Good morning, everyone. Mariam has explained at length the digital landscape in which we operate and how disinformation at various levels, from our personal lives to our professional lives to our public domain, is affecting us. There have been efforts which have been shown to you in detail, the existing practices, but why we have not been able to deal, if I may call, with the virus of disinformation, because there are certain gaps and challenges, and I would be focusing on those gaps and challenges, followed by the way forward and what needs to be done. On the screen, you can see some critical remarks by Reporters Without Borders, by Committee to Protect Journalists and Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression regarding Germany's Facebook Act. They criticized it, called it incompatible with provisions of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as privatization of censorship. Why did it happen? Because today in the world, various countries have brought in legislations which are not complementary, rather they have different provisions. They are different levels of combating disinformation. In some states, we see more regressive policies adopted, internet shutdowns being promoted, while on the other side of the coin, there are states which, in the name of freedom of expression, are not doing anything about a phenomena which is having a detrimental impact on the enjoyment of our human rights. So there is a range of responses from member states, which is creating a huge gap in terms of how to deal with this phenomena of disinformation. Moving on to the fact that Mariam shared a definition of disinformation. But this definition is not universally agreed. It is not owned by states. It is a definition that has come from an entity, but even while in our negotiation, at one point, we wanted to have a discussion on this, but it was too difficult to have a discussion on the issue of disinformation because there's no consensus on that. And the lack of consensus on the constitutive elements of disinformation, or how to define disinformation, is creating trouble in identifying or interpreting the scope of the disinformation, how it impacts and how it can be prevented when there is no agreed concept of or a definitional conceptual clarity on an issue. It leads to ambiguity in terms of adopting range of measures, including legislative measures at the national level or any international regulation, how it would be done in the years to come. We also see at the international level, there is lack of cooperation and consensus on how to counter disinformation. Different states, stakeholders, actors, and even multilateral organizations and their entities have adopted a range of responses, which sometimes are conflicting or at other times are complementary. They are responses sometimes that lack uniformity and universality. Every country is adopting laws that suits to its needs rather than protecting and ensuring that freedom of expression is not curtailed in the name of promoting or countering disinformation and promoting freedom of expression. There was an attempt in 2017 through the joint declaration on freedom of expression and fake news, disinformation and propaganda, but it was never intergovernmentally negotiated. It was an effort of some stakeholders, and therefore it is not owned by member states. Why it is important internationally that there should be a consensus, otherwise it will lead to conflicting responses. Today, there is overall lack of transparency regarding companies' content moderation systems and processes. Facebook has its own policies. When you go to Twitter, you find a different scenario altogether. However, the landscape for people is the same. It is the social media in which they are operating and experiencing disinformation attacks or compromising their right to privacy at times. And there is overall lack of compliance on human rights norms and standards by these companies, because we must keep in mind that social media companies and online platforms are earning huge profits through commercialization of disinformation. A very interesting term was used by Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Opinion, Irene Khan, in her report on this issue. She called it global disinformation system. So today we are confronted with a global disinformation system. And in order to deal with that global disinformation system, collective responses at the international level are a must. And this is something where we are lagging behind. For example, digital platforms currently have no or limited legal liability in terms of intermediary liability for content host that they host their own websites. For example, in US, it's Section 230 of Communication Decency Act does not require any platform to take down any content. Rather, it is not treated as the publisher or the speaker of that information which is posted online site. So there is no liability on the content that is being produced. In the old good days, we used to say that if a news channel, no matter the information source, produces fake news, it is not a reliable news network. Why do not we say the same thing, that a social media platform which is passing on to its consumers and users fake information is not a reliable one, just because they have immunity from legal liability? The day they will be liable for the false and misleading content, they will act responsibly, and they will start moving in a direction which will lead to developing international responses. And they would realize that despite their commercial interests, they cannot compromise our human rights, including our right to privacy. Against these gaps and challenges, and this was the backdrop which led to a discussion, and Pakistan took the lead in presenting a resolution on countering disinformation. The purpose and the objective of the resolution was to ensure that there is a coordinated response of the member state and the international community on the issue of countering disinformation, rather than having different responses and working in silos. It is high time to work together and to fill the existing gaps at the international level. Because if there are no uniform policies and standards or regulations adopted at the international level, states will continue to do howsoever they wish to do or deal with the issue of disinformation at the national level. In a democracy, there will be less action, and people will be given freedom of absolute expression, which will lead to infringement of freedom of expression, or for that matter, compromising privacy, dignity, spreading racism, racial discrimination, social discord, and many other evils in the societies. On the other hand, regressive regimes will curtail freedom of expression in the name of countering disinformation. So it is important that there should be a coordinated international response which complies with human rights obligations of states. And in the resolution, we wanted to highlight that business enterprises do not operate in vacuum. They also have a legal responsibility to protect and promote our human rights and fundamental freedoms. The negotiations were difficult on a new concept. Nevertheless, we managed, and the resolution was brought in the third committee of the General Assembly, which deals with human rights and humanitarian affairs. And after lengthy negotiation, it was adopted on 24 December 2021. And this has initiated a concerted campaign at the international level by states and all other actors, including business enterprises, social media companies, and other media entities, to engage in a discussion on countering disinformation. In the resolution, we have highlighted that disinformation has a negative impact on the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedom. It impacts our rights, ranging from their spreading and racial discrimination, xenophobia, related intolerance, to curtailing our right to privacy, seek timely information, and so on and so forth. It has also an impact on the attainment of sustainable development goals, which are very important and significant for our world today. The resolution also focuses that ICTs have enabled pathways for spreading disinformation, and this amplified disinformation is leading to political, ideological, and commercial discord, and these motivations are driving the international agenda at a scope and speed that has never happened in history. Today, we do not only live in a world where you have all the information, rather we live also in a world where you have disinformation, and we have to operate. Our future would be linked with this disinformation landscape, and we cannot imagine a future without facing this menace of disinformation. The resolution also reaffirmed the duties of states to counter disinformation, which interfere in the internal affairs of other states. There is a responsibility of every state not to meddle in the internal affairs of other states, and to ensure that they do not impact rights of citizens of other states. The resolution also urges states to take policy measures ranging from education, awareness raising, capacity building, resilience development, advocacy at different levels to counter disinformation within their own countries. The resolution also stresses the need for cooperation to counter disinformation, and that is the most significant need of the hour. We need to develop multi-stakeholder cooperation and multi-dimensional responses. Only then we will be able to counter the menace of disinformation that the world is confronted today. The resolution also requires human rights mechanisms, the Special Rapporteurs, Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and other UN entities to address issue of disinformation within their mandate, in their reports, in their comments when they are discussing countries and how the policies and strategies are being formulated by them. So they will, from now onwards, in their interventions, in their public press releases, joint communication, will address the issue of disinformation. The resolution has also requested the Secretary General to prepare a report on the best practices, which all of us as member states would share. And it would be a compilation of best practices. The report will serve as a guide for those who look for options and seek ways to counter disinformation. So this was just a brief overview of our efforts, how we have taken up this issue. And today there is an international consensus that disinformation is a scourge and it needs to be countered at all levels, from international to national to domestic to organizational level. The last section of our presentation deals with the future landscape, how to navigate in a world where you have information and disinformation placed together simultaneously around you, how to ensure that we as human beings and as responsible citizens can react in a way that we do not infringe other people's rights. For this, different levels of responses are required, and we have listed different recommendations for different entities, the actions that they are required to take. Firstly, I would go to media entities. Media entities have an important role to play because they are the ones which provide information. So for media, I think in every country, they need to develop a code of conduct, a self-regulatory framework to which they will abide by and ensure that they are not part of spreading disinformation and fake news. It calls upon the responsible journalism that needs to be promoted. There is also need for media literacy campaigns. The capacity of media workers and journalists needs to also be built up. Media can play an important role in creating awareness among citizens on the harms of disinformation, that how it can lead to discrimination, hostility, violence, and perhaps genocide. So, and media also need to expose fake news. They have a responsibility to act and to contribute proactively in countering disinformation. Civil societies and social media also have an important role. Social media today is a major driver or source of information for all of us. Social media companies need to review their business models as part of their due diligence efforts and make them compliant with human rights standards. They should not think that they are operating in a landscape where they do not comply with any standards and are only giving primacy to their commercial interests. There is a need for internal monitoring mechanisms that the companies need to establish. There is a necessity for third-party oversight boards, which will ensure that there is an oversight of whatever actions they are taking. There is also need for enforcing transparency, due process by users, promoting users' rights and due diligence on the part of companies. These social media companies should also publish comprehensive, detailed, and contextual transparency reports in which they should tell all of us the actions that they have taken to counter disinformation, the complaints that they have received, the appeals that people have made, and what are they doing. And they should also issue special reports in exceptional circumstances like the COVID-19 pandemic and how they have dealt with the issue of infodemic in today's world. They should also embed right to privacy in their digital design, because in the name of curbing or countering disinformation, our right to privacy as citizens of this world should not be compromised. Internet providers, platforms, and donors also need to invest in fact checking, and journalists and others can also play a role in this. These companies can also promote media literacy. Civil society needs to come to the forefront and play an active role in countering diverse type of disinformation. Civil society can and is in fact playing, as Mariam has shown to you some of the efforts, role of advocacy and capacity building. Civil society can raise a lot of awareness in the general public on the fact that one message which is going to disinform a huge number of people and may lead to perhaps violence or discrimination can be avoided. Please recheck facts before sharing it. So this is the message that they can promote, and they can reach out to so many people. Coming to the states also have a responsibility to invest in research to understand the efficacy of countering disinformation campaigns. States should also ensure transparency and, in disclosure of public disinformation and data in line with the right to information and SDG indicator 16 or 10, public access to information. States should also make efforts to raise awareness through electronic and print media. States should also endeavor to do capacity building of media workers, government officials on issues of public importance and how they can counter disinformation, for example, in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, and how they can ensure a right to privacy of their citizens. Officials need to be trained in different cyber communication spheres of states. States also need to comply with human rights norms and standards rather than coming up with arbitrary laws which breach individuals' right to freedom of expression, their right to privacy. At the international level, concerted efforts need to be mounted. There is a need for formation of a UN intra-agency group to look into these issues, how these platforms are countering disinformation, how their transparency and cooperation could be enhanced. Awareness raising campaigns by UNESCO and Department of Global Communication, which have already started, can be strengthened and can be, other than COVID-19, they can go into different dimensions of public campaigns on dealing with the issue of disinformation at the international level, which will facilitate member states in taking forward those discussions. Human rights mechanisms need to address the impact of disinformation in their reports, in their public press releases, in their communications, in their outreach, in their advocacy. At the international level, there is a need for a regulation or a legally binding instrument. And we have the basic elements already there. They just need to be put together. A consensus needs to be developed. For example, Article 17, right to privacy, Article 19, freedom of expression, Article 20, combating incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence on grounds of ethnicity, race, and religion can form an important elements of this regulation. Then Article 4 of ICED, which deals with incitement to racial discrimination of International Convention on Racial Discrimination, can contribute to this debate. Then we have legal grounds used by case laws and courts all over the world, European Court of Human Rights and others. The principles of lawfulness, legitimacy, and proportionality should be built into these regulations when they are made. Another important aspect that has actually led to a lot of controversy internationally and at the domestic level, how to combat disinformation and how to develop a threshold. We have a framework in the form of Rabat Plan of Action on the prohibition of advocacy of national, racial, and religious hatred that constitute incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence of 2012. From a legal perspective, to counter disinformation or to criminalize, if at all, disinformation, we should have a threshold, and it should be a higher threshold. And there is a 6-part test that can be applied in the context of disinformation while developing any regulation. First, social and political context should be important when you're countering disinformation. Whether that disinformation is targeting a specific group or audience to spread social discord, whether it is meant for political purposes or is it in the private sphere, that is very important. Then this status of speaker is very significant. Is it disinformation spread by an ordinary citizen to another citizen? Or is the disinformation being spread by a politician or a public figure? Because the status of the speaker will determine the impact of harm that will happen to people by the spread of that piece of disinformation. Then is there an intent to incite the audience against a targeted group? That is very important. Then fourth, content and form of the speech, how it is being placed, projected, and promoted is again important. The extent of the dissemination also plays an important role, how it is spread. And finally, the likelihood of harm, the principle of eminence is also significant. Then we can also draw strength for this regulation from UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, which provides some of the elements that could be built into this regulation. Then this regulation should also have a component of mechanism of oversight and so on and so forth, and an oversight of the policies and regulations that the states are going to formulate. Finally, moving on to concluding our presentation, in the end, we would like to say that disinformation, it's like a virus that needs to be combated and countered before it takes up our spheres of influence, our public domain and information. We need to ensure that in the name of countering disinformation, we do not curtail freedom of expression. For this, we need multi-dimensional, multi-stakeholder responses. And in this, all of us need to play a collective role, member states, international organizational, regional organizational, business enterprises, and all of us. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheikh and Ms. Salim, for this incredibly comprehensive and informative presentation. I'm sure it has provoked many questions, and Vaibhav has been curating them, monitoring them, and I'm going to ask you to help us direct those questions, if you would, Vaibhav.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Mayo. And also, I'd like to echo what the sentiment that Dr. Mayo expressed towards Dr. Sheikh and Ms. Salim for such a wonderful and insightful keynote address, and so relevant and so timely. And Ms. Salim, as you rightly said, this is a virus that is bigger than any other virus. We're talking about the pandemic, and we're talking about how to handle the pandemic, but this is the pandemic of pandemics that needs to be addressed. This is the war that we've been fighting for decades, not just years. I mean, you talked about, the 1963 League of Nations, right? Or I'm not sure if I'm getting the right year right. And the consecutive initiatives, about fighting the disinformation, but it's just an ongoing war that unfortunately we still have to fight. And the future generations will probably, benefit from initiatives such as the resolution of fighting disinformation. I really appreciate that. We've had much excitement in the audience members, and we had many questions. I'm not sure how much time you have, but I'd like to bring in some of the questions for discussion here. Can I request you, Dr. Sheikh, to stop sharing your screen, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you. So firstly, the comment saying that audiences were really looking forward to this session, and they showed excitement in this keynote address. So I wanted to acknowledge that through YouTube comments. We have questions, and to start with, a question from Dr. McDowell is that in South Asia, how can we distinguish between legitimate efforts to control misinformation from efforts to shut down opposition political voices?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Yes, it's important. This is what we've been saying all along in our presentation today, that until and unless we develop a coordinated response at the international level, which is compliant with human rights norms and standards, and we already have existing frameworks, provisions, which I've mentioned a few, ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the 6-part test of that Rabat Plan of Action offers. The states will tend to interpret disinformation the way they wish, or whatever their domestic laws say. So you need to have a uniform international standard to which everyone complies. The way we have international standards, for example, to combat elimination of discrimination against women. So there should be an international yardstick to ensure that states do not interpret disinformation in a manner that suits their domestic audiences, and which leads to curtailing freedom of expression of opposition parties, of minorities. This is a common phenomena that has been happening.
And to add that, we have been insisting on a collective responsibility of all stakeholders. So whenever the states are taking actions, the social media platforms, the users, and all the business entities should be taken on board in this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. There's a question about specific to disinformation related to COVID-19. And the question is COVID-19 disinformation a special case, or is it connected with some existing groups and strategies?
Well, COVID-19 is a classic case which involved all kind of agendas and purposes because it has been prolonged for a while. But this is one of the case study. We haven't seen anything in the past regarding, but yes, we have heard about polio vaccine. There was an ideological disinformation on that in South Asia. Many ideological disinformation campaigns were surrounding vaccine efficiency being in past. But as regards COVID-19, it involves the holistic approach to disinformation. So it's a classic case for the researchers.
And also COVID-19 pandemic has made us realize the gravity of how detrimental the spread of disinformation on an issue of public importance like health can possibly be. And its detrimental impacts are very consequential and serious. We have heard and read on different platforms how fake medicines were given, and that might have led to deaths of people. So this can cause consequential harm. So the harms made us realize that there has to be a unified, concerted effort at the international level to deal with the menace of disinformation. Disinformation has always existed in the past. Perhaps it used to be called in another variation propaganda, which partially can be false or can be factual. But now it has turned into a global systematic system, as the special rapporteur called global disinformation system.
And to add, UNESCO and Department of Global Communication have therefore initiated or verified campaigns focused on COVID-19 disinformation, because this has emerged a growing point of concern for all the stakeholders, member states, and the media entities. So that's a classic example.
Thank you. In your concluding remarks, you mentioned about how the fight against, the disinformation is multidimensional, multi-layered, and including different kinds of entities. One very important entity among them is an individual entity, individual people. And one question is pertaining to that, which is addressing disinformation online feels so daunting. What do you suggest for an individual to address disinformation in their daily life without cutting off exposure to people with differing opinions?
Media literacy, online literacy, having an informed audience is a key to curtail disinformation and counter disinformation. People should know which website, which source to track. And as you have seen, so many tools are presented here now. You can download the deepfake, for example, software is available. There are so many applications. So if you are a tech savvy, you should be tech savvy enough to discern between the fake news and the fact. So that's user information is a lot important in this present context. User has to see before. That is why I would mention again the UN verified campaign. Their logo was to pause before you share. So you have to pause before you share anything, whether maybe you are passing on that information unintentionally, but the source must have some intention in mind, in some motive in mind. So you have to be responsibly disseminating and forwarding that information to the other user and verify that information before you pass it on.
Just add to what Mariam said, we will have to, the future that we wish to imagine, a future landscape where our access to information is not curtailed, our freedom of expression is not infringed. We will have to develop vigilant citizenry. And I think in schools, at the college level, we need to sensitize our young generation of what is disinformation, how it is going to impact if you share something which is without verifying, it turns out to be disinformation, how it is going to impact your credibility, and how it is going to impact the other person's right regarding whom you are spreading that disinformation. And of course, it has a legal dimension to it. If that disinformation is going to cause public harm, then at that stage, with a very higher threshold, I explained that a while ago, then it should be criminalized if it is impacting the rights of citizens at a large scale.
And we have seen many instances, I have shown many examples in my presentation, that disinformation has affected, in fact, the individuals. They have incited the mobs towards hate and violence. So the individuals have to take guard of the information they are receiving.
Thank you so much. One key vehicle that plays an important role in disseminating the information from organizations such as UN and UNESCO and other institutions to common people are media and our journalists. Through our previous panel, we had an important theme that that emerged was that how important the role that journalists and media institutions play in disseminating important information during times of uncertainties such as the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So what kind of partnerships can be or are formed with media houses as well as with individual media professionals to help control disinformation, particularly in South Asia?
I think we have to develop a content regulation mechanism, which is called a self-regulation mechanism. Media entities have to take care of a responsible behavior in disseminating, taking a credible source of information to take. And we have always, even in the resolution, we have asked, and even on our way forward, that media stakeholders have to come forward and give a space to the states and the individuals to reveal what kind of policies they are being taken to ensure that the information they would be sharing would not be curtailing the human rights or infringing upon the privacy or of an individual. So there's a lot of responsibilities on media entities because they are the fountainhead of the information. So they have to be vigilant at first place, and they have to verify their source of information before they are passing on. And if among their community, if another media entity is having faking or impersonating the website or the information, they have, as a community, this is called a peer pressure. They have to build a peer pressure to boycott that media, which is convicted of the disinformation. As we have said, that disinformation is a planned activity. It's a criminal activity because it has a pure intention of causing a social harm. So there is no question of ignoring or being negligent of what the other partner entities are doing. So those within the premises of those media entities, they have to take guard and self-regulate their peers on these activities.
I would add to that, in order to counter disinformation at the national or for that matter, international level, media will have to be considered as a stakeholder, as a partner in this endeavor. They will have to be given the importance that they deserve in formulation of any international regulation or anything that might come up. So if we are going to give as international community ownership to media and journalists, that they have an important role to play and they should be given their rightful place at the table in those discussions, and their input should be sought. Perhaps they will own up to the challenge and they can play an instrumental role in countering disinformation all around the world.
And when we see the context of South Asia has a dynamic landscape of media. There are private channels, there the digital technology, online news media is very vibrant there. So they have a different and more a stake in the disinformation. So South Asian member states have to come forward, develop a customized which suits their landscape, customized strategy to come up with the regulations which suits them as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. A couple of last questions, one from our moderator here, Dr. Mayo. To what extent has the global disinformation crisis been used by individual state to censor or shut communication media or to infringe on freedom and human rights?
Well, it has certainly been used, and that's what we are saying. And our resolution even acknowledges that states need to behave more responsibility and comply with human rights standards. It has, whenever an opportunity arises, such as like the COVID-19 pandemic, human rights can be curtailed and infringed upon. For that, you have to have an international response. Till the time we do not develop that international response, recently, Secretary General has also proposed a global code of conduct that promotes integrity in public information. So till the time we do not have a response of the international community, something that all states will own up to it and would have to comply with, different responses to countering disinformation would always arise, because firstly, it is already discussed and debated, rather contested, what constitutes disinformation. So different varying interpretation leads to varying responses by states, and they choose what it suits them, where it suits them. So this is the scenario that we are faced with.
And we call it global disinformation disorder. So it calls for a global governance to deal with the disinformation. So there should be a global sense of accountability towards the action the states are taking to either to combat disinformation or either to deal with the information maybe of their critics or dissenters. So there are lots, because Twitter dubs the disinformation as a state-sponsored information. There's a lot of stake for and through about the state's responsibility. So there's a global governance has to come forward to deal with information disorder.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. A question really quickly about social media, and you touched upon it in terms of how governments and state institutions are taking actions against them. So question here is, Facebook profits from eyes on the fake news pages. Is there a way to prohibit or limit these profits?
Facebook and Twitter, they are the major stakeholders, as we have mentioned, and the problem with the Facebook and social media platforms is the AI technology, the digital technology, which has made the disinformation campaign organized, but at the same time sophisticated, hard to find out. We can find out maybe the bots, but who has backed them? It's kind of a difficult phenomena to discern. So states have to come forward in forcing the social media platforms to reveal what kind of information they are taking down, what kind of information they are getting, who is sponsoring, so they have the data. So it's their responsibility to come and curtail their profit commercialized objectives for the sake of human rights.
And till the time we do not have, something concrete, we have in the resolution shown concern at the commercialization of this phenomena. Business enterprises tend to operate in an environment where they think that they are not supposed to comply with human rights norms and standards, and they do not fulfill their due diligence, and they're not transparent into how they are spreading that disinformation, because of course it's a commercially viable option to get something which might be disinformation and spread it around because you're earning something out of it. In order to do that, again, in this case, in the past, it used to be that treaties and regulations have been made for states, and states are being called upon to fulfill their legal obligations. I think it is high time that we live in a world where corporate entities have also assumed a lot of importance and have gained a lot of space in this global arena. They should also be made to comply with the same rules and regulations, the same human rights norms and standards which the states are supposed to comply with, because they have become as important actors who shape every day our opinion, who influence what we do and how we respond as public.
So corporate social responsibility they have to take up.
In fact, it goes beyond corporate social responsibility. Rather, corporate accountability is the need of the hour.
Oh, the world we long for, and oh, the world that we imagine moving forward.
We are wishing for. Yes.
We hope that people don't put profit before people, organizations don't put profit before people. But this has been such a wonderful
for so far. Yeah.
Absolutely. This has been such a wonderful discussion and such an important keynote address. So I cannot thank you both enough for your time today. I'd invite Dr. Mayo to kindly conclude, present his concluding remarks. But thank you once again.
I can just echo Vaibhav's observation and thanks. You've presented so much vital information that will not rest this morning. It will be, I think, continued in the remaining part of this conference and going forward. And I'm sure many of the audience have been enriched as we have by your presentations. And thank you so much for being with us and for addressing the questions again so eloquently. And I think we've learned a lot this morning, thanks to you.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the thoughts, how we should counter disinformation globally if we want to imagine a future safe from the scourge of disinformation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheikh. Thank you so much, Ms. Salim. Thank you so much, Dr. Mayo, for this wonderful session. I'm sure our audiences really enjoyed this session. I personally really enjoyed it. I felt so inspired, and I'll definitely incorporate what we discussed today in my personal research agenda moving forward. So thank you so much once again. And that concludes the keynote address today. I appreciate your time. For our YouTube live audience, we will continue the discussion on imagining futures of South Asian media and cultural studies from the perspectives of education, research, as well as practice with our esteemed panelists who will be joining us tomorrow for another roundtable, which is themed Imagining Futures of South Asian Research and Media. So please do join us. Please do tune in again tomorrow. You can find the conference program on our website, which is bit.ly/SAMCS22. Once again, it's bit.ly/SAMCS22. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.